Morning. Thank you. Antoine, I know a special girl in Boston who's going to love theshoes.com, so I can tell you this it's absolutely going to proliferate. Well, good morning. You know, we've started this conversation about artificial intelligence and the various components and the various opinions, the positives and the potentially negative sides, as David pointed out. But you know, the title of this whole session is where technology gets ambitious. And I would argue that one of the most ambitious innovators in history, Steve Jobs, when he was confronted with pancreatic cancer, which was at the pinnacle of his career, he humbly understood that as a community, as a society, we still do not fundamentally understand the underpinnings and the biological makeup of not only pancreatic cancer, but as we look at the diseases of the future, like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's in the aging populations, we still do not understand the bio-networks and the makeup of these diseases. So as we seek as a community, as a pharmaceutical community, as an innovative community, but I would say as a biological community, we have to humbly appreciate that we cannot humanly process the information that's necessary for us to capture that real understanding of biology. So we need help. And where are we going to get this help from? So in the next 14 and a half minutes, I'm going to run through with you just three simple themes. What is the current landscape of pharmaceutical development? How are we developing drugs today? Where does artificial intelligence come into play, and how can we harness this power of combining artificial intelligence with helping us make sense of all this data that we can finally, for the first time in history, start to put together? And lastly, how are we going to save lives? So I have an animation that, if we go through this process of the current paradigm of drug development, it's very iterative. We start with various hypotheses in the laboratory. We have to work our way through those hypotheses, and we develop these drug targets. As these drug targets are developed, pharmaceutical companies have drug libraries of millions of compounds that usually takes 3 to 5 years and $150 million to get through, but the clinical development takes up to $800 million in cost. So as we go through the iterations to get these drugs profiled and screened and perform tremendously expensive clinical trials, on average, it takes $2.6 billion and 10 to 15 years to create a drug. If you think about this for a second, how many countries even have a GDP of $2.6 billion? Well, that's what we as an industry spend on developing one single drug. And there are numbers, this is based on the Joseph DeMasi numbers from Tufts University. There are numbers that even go higher than this. So, and the efficiency, by the way, out of every 100 phase 1 clinical trials, for those of you not particularly familiar with the process, after the discovery of these drugs, we then have to go through 3 phases of therapy. The phase 1 to look at the safety profile of the drug, and if that drug is rendered safe and we have a dose that can then be studied in a specific population, we go to phase 2, and then phase 3 is to really look at these technologies in a broader population so that we can decide the dosage in the population before we submit for approval. But only 1 in every 100 phase 1 trials become a drug. So if you think about this process that's inordinately expensive and inexcusably long is operating at a 1% success rate. In any other industry in the world, we would all be fired. So, so to me, how do we flip a model? How do we actually say, okay, obviously there are cases where this works. There are cases where you have a neat mutation in a certain disease. You take that target-based mutation. There's an antibody that is targeted to that specific mutation, or immunotherapies. And in those cases, we're fairly successful. But for inexplicable diseases like pancreatic cancer, where and I'm wearing my Project Survival pin. This is a collaboration we started with Harvard Medical School and the Pancreatic Research Cancer Group in the U.S. to really try to understand this silent killer, because unfortunately, just in the case of pancreatic cancer, we unfortunately cannot diagnose these diseases until it's very advanced. The signs and symptoms are really very minimal until the disease is very advanced. And at that point, only 6.2%, 1 in 16 people, will survive past 5 years with this disease. So as an industry, we have to do better, but we have to go back to biology. This is the only way in the world that we will create drugs that are actually tailored towards the biology. So what is this new way? If we reverse the entire system now, let's start all over. Go back into the patient and start this process with biology. Go into the human system to try to make sense of it at the molecular level, at our genes and our proteins, to go out of the molecule and the cell, to go into the organ, and then to look at the entire system of the human body and try to understand what keeps us healthy. Because if we don't understand what keeps us healthy, we can't develop disease. So instead of taking this dartboard approach and trying to get a target-based approach, what Berg does is we look at this system, much like airline maps. We've all looked at at airline maps before, where we are able to appreciate how an airline operates and where those hubs of that airline system, that if we analogize this to biology, the next generation of drugs and medicines are created by going, once we understand that healthy system, going into tumors and going into human tissue samples from a disease environment, and specifically in cancer, just like we talk about these airline systems and hubs, actually build maps, use artificial intelligence, and use the patient's biological information, the clinical information, the real-world information from this patient, their sleeping habits and their diet habits, so that these maps that are created to represent what's ongoing in this patient is the narrative of the patient. So instead of the hypotheses creating the data, allow the data to generate hypotheses in the form of these patient maps. So as we go through the future in drug development, not just take this one-size-fits-all. Let's be able to really garner what is precision medicine. Be able to treat patients based on a selection process of, we have the profile of all the various drugs, and we would have the profile of the patients, obviously, and allow the AI to correlate and match those patient maps with efficacy of the drug, to able to triage specific side effects. So we move away from this one-size-fits-all, because, just to give the example, almost 90% of people with pancreatic cancer fail the first line of therapy. So, if you think about it, it's obvious that the system has to change. But at Berg, when our focus on building and developing our cancer technologies, we built in a pan-cancer model, as we refer to it internally, where we looked at all different types of cancers with clinical records and molecular information. So instead of just developing technologies that are very toxic to the cell, we interrogated the system to ask where specifically in the biology, the biological makeup of cancer, is something actionable now. how can we use the mass population data on these cells to understand that, and the results that came back to say the mitochondria, which is the energy source of the cell, also ironically houses the cell's ability to go through cell death. So we developed, with the help of the AI, guided the development of a cancer drug to focus in on targeting the area of the cell to restore and recapitulate and normalize a cancer cell into a working, healthy mitochondria to reteach that cell how to undergo apoptosis. So, you may say, well, this all sounds very highly innovative and technological and sexy. Where's this proof? Can you really do it? So I want to share with you a case study in precision medicine, and this has really gotten a lot of attention in the past 12 months or so. So the definition of precision medicine is giving the right patient the right drug at the right time. That sounds, on the current paradigm, that's a pretty tall order. But when you look at what's ongoing in this amazing shift towards the next biological revolution in the 21st century, but also when you look at real hardcore the economic need. In this country we saw David Cameron start a 100,000 genome project to sequence 100,000 British citizens, so that the community can understand where certain risk factors in that system, but also help the NHS to be more efficient. At home in the U.S., President Obama started a precision medicine initiative where we're going to sequence a million individuals and look at all different parts of their biology, so that we can help appreciate not only for the folks who have disease to be able to treat them with drugs that are more precise, but for folks who are still healthy. How can we keep them healthy? How can we still intervene at a time where individuals are still pre-diabetic and pre-hypertensive, et cetera, so that we can prevent the onset of disease? So to go through this case study with you, we got the trial approved by the FDA to take live tissue samples in the patients that we can get them with cancer before, during, and after the first few cycles of therapy. So we, in addition to treating these patients with either our drug or a combination therapy, we're collecting the biological samples, and obviously we have the medical records. So then we go well past what was referred to as multi-omic profiling, or just a fancy term for going and looking at the genes and proteins and lipids and the metabolites. And at Berg, we believe that genomics is extremely important. It's a fingerprint of the human system, but it's not the full story. So the other component that Berg does is we try to create the full narrative on patients by going well beyond genomics and employing the use of artificial intelligence, so that as we take these examples by looking at a patient with breast cancer and a patient with gastric cancer, or a patient with prostate cancer, these are all very different patients. Usually we just say this is cancer, but cancer is a multifactorial disease. It's made up of a very complex system. And as I said earlier in the talk, we need the help of technology to help us appreciate where the full story of biology is going to come from. And like I mentioned, we're creating maps on every single patient. So we're taking all the complex biological information and transforming that into something that's representative of the patient in the form of a map. And these are actually real maps in the trial. So in those maps, it's able to tell us what are the genes and the proteins and the lipids, et cetera, that are representative of the biological profile of these patients. So as we apply what we refer to as interrogative biology, because we're interrogating these systems, we essentially are going to have these maps on every patient in the trial. So as the trial has progressed and we've built these maps, we will also, more importantly, be able to appreciate from the individuals who have a response to therapy versus individuals who, unfortunately, may not have had a response. What are the key elements in their biology that's led to them having a response? So as we complete this phase of the trial, we then take all of the maps and use the artificial intelligence to build one global map that's representative of a response to our therapy. So by looking at the response to our therapy, we then, the artificial intelligence, in addition to these real-time patient dashboards, has allowed us to get to this, which is a hardcore example of taking the best of the robust biology by employing artificial intelligence. So as you see here, this is a PET scan. Our platform predicted that the drug will work by reversing and the fuel that cancer likes to operate on to allow the cancer environment to operate in a more healthy, normal state. So by reversing the metabolism or the uptake of glucose. So this is a PET scan that shows that in 6 weeks of treatment, and this is a bladder cancer case where you can see that the uptake of glucose, which is representative of the metabolism of the tumor, is not only decreasing, but more importantly, the tumor itself is increasing. So the AI is able to guide the patient outcome by helping us to gauge that patient understanding, allowing the physician to appreciate the interpretation of the system and the biology to gauge the next generation of drugs. So how will AI shape the future of healthcare? So in closing, the next generation of medicine using this system, as I mentioned, the cost, will not only reduce the overall burden on healthcare systems, but allow us to use the best of biology and artificial intelligence to lead to accelerated drug development, successful drug trials, and better treatment for patients, to put that power back into the physicians and the patients, so that as Windows from Microsoft has helped us to participate in personal computing, and Apple has helped us to all communicate with each other, artificial intelligence and the next generation of biology is going to help us to participate in our own health, and as a community, put that power back into developing the next generation of drugs. So thank you.
Amazing work, Niven. But we still have a system that relies on human trials after animal trials. We still have a system where regulators expect that companies will spend the billions of dollars on developing the patentable new treatments. What would be your message to the regulators if we're going to achieve this vision in the short term?
Well, funny enough, you touched on that. I was invited by the FDA in late summer to participate on a workshop on systems pharmacology and drug safety. And I was so warmed to the fact that the regulators are now embracing these types of technologies because of the core reason of side effects. Side effects leads to not only higher cost and burden to that patient, but there's a need for more drugs. There's a need for potentially more hospitalization. So the cost of the drug is one thing, but the cost of not doing well on a drug, the economic impact is even greater. So I think the FDA, the EMEA, MHRA, are actually, and other agencies around the world, are moving towards molecular adaptive clinical trials, embracing these types of technologies to, one, help companies to produce drugs that lead to less side effects. But precision medicine is going to be the future. You know, if we look at what happened a few weeks ago when NICE decided to drop the reimbursement of Avastin here in the UK. You know, the governments and the healthcare systems and the payers They're saying we will not pay anymore for drugs that don't have a benefit to the patient. This is highly provocative, highly disruptive to the entire system, because it's going to force the pharmaceutical industry to produce drugs that's based on the correlation to the biology. So I would argue that the regulators are actually getting involved in this revolution.
How many years before a typical patient reporting to their medical practitioner with symptoms of Alzheimer's or cancer will expect to have a personalized AI-based treatment plan?
If you had asked me this a year ago, I would have said 5 to 7 years. Today, I think that it may only be 2 to 3 years away, because we are advancing in this field. The field of medicine and AI is beating that Moore's Law curve. And more importantly, what is helping to galvanize this progress is that we're starting to collaborate with each other. You see big universities and the regulators and pharmaceutical companies and governments start to collaborate with each other in ways that 10 years ago was unfathomable. So I think that's a big step change. That's when everyone says, there's all these negative things. I think this is one of the most exciting times in healthcare. And using AI and other like technologies is going to help us to do things a lot faster.
Remarkable work.
Yes.
We'll be following Berg closely in Wired. Thank you very much for
Thank
making
you.
the journey.
Thank you.
Niven.